All right, I think we'll go ahead and kick things off here. Thanks everybody for joining. I think I probably know most of you, but my name's Joe. I'm the manager of the Aquaculture Information Exchange. We are trying to create an online space for the U.S. aquaculture community. And today we're joined by James Sibley, one of the rare aquaculture influencers out there, although I'm not sure if he would describe himself that way.
I've
But in
accepted.
any case, yeah. But in any case, just before we get started, I want to make sure everybody knows how to join the discussion on our website. Hopefully, we'll be able to get all the questions that people have in before the end of the session today. But just in case, you can click on the groups tab on our website and go to the Connect and Learn group and join that if you haven't already. And then you can go to the discussions tab. And here is the discussion thread for today's session. And I will go ahead and post that in the chat. But yeah, without further ado, I will hand it over to James.
Great. Thanks, Joe. So as Joe mentioned, I'm somewhere between an influencer or an educator online. I like to call myself a fishfluencer sometimes. My name's James Sibley. I'm based here in Boston right now. I'm actually moving to Scotland at the end of the month, next month. So if any of you are over there across the pond, I'll come say hi. but my role in the aquaculture space here has been largely on social media. So my studies and my education and my interest all have to do with aquaculture and life sciences, and that's culminated into this online presence that I've developed. And I'm going to get into that here pretty in depth momentarily. I just want to run us through a few points first. What exactly is social media in the aquaculture industry? What influencers are? What do I do here? As well as other influencers, because a lot of people might think influencers are, there's lifestyle, there's makeup, there's all this stuff, but there's industry influencers too. And that's what I do. So I'll walk you through that. And then we're going to dive into really my experience in this space. There aren't really a lot of us in the aquaculture or seafood space online at large. What I do is unique enough that I've had to figure it out as I go on my own. A lot of trial and error, two steps back, two steps forward, one step back. I'm not going back that far. So I just kind of want to give you some advice there. If you're working in the social media space, you have interest in it, or you're with a company who's trying to build an online presence. So that's kind of the itinerary today here. Ooh, just to start off, social media in the aquaculture space, there's really three components to it. At the top, we have the actual viewers. That's who you're trying to connect with. Just people scrolling social media, following influencers, following companies. The companies down on the left who are posting to their channels, whether it be LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, all of these different platforms have social forms now. And then there's the influencers over on the right. We're also followed by a lot of the community. So typically they're separated, right? So you have influencers, you have your community or your demographic, your target market, and the companies online. Most aquaculture companies have a presence online. If you're involved with a company that doesn't, I highly recommend you do. It's so important these days, and it's only getting more so. What I do and what industry social media influencers do is I work with the industry directly to communicate with their target demographics, which happen to be my audience, and to build more reach. So companies don't typically gain the most traction online. They do have a following of people in their communities, buyers who are buying from them, some interested in the aquaculture and seafood space, but it's relatively niche. Influencers like myself come in, and people like to follow personalities more than they do corporations. So I come in with a large audience who's interested in this niche, right? All of my followers are interested in seafood and aquaculture. That's why they follow me. And I work with those companies to showcase what it is they're doing. There's a few of us in the industry, in the aquaculture space, but at the moment I do stand with the most following. It's been 3 or 4 years in the running. And one of the first things I was running into when I came into this space as an influencer was, who cares? Well, everyone should care. Social media has taken the world by storm. Whether it's for better or worse is up in the air, but it's here and it's prevalent. So that's why I recommended everybody who's not on social media with their companies, with themselves, you should be in some way. Over 50% of Americans consume their information through social media. I know I consume all of my information on social media. Even if I'm on a news site, I'll go look it up somewhere with somebody in the industry or a niche expert that I trust more. 80% of consumers make their decisions based on what they see online. So that kind of speaks for itself. And then here's the part where it's a little, we're starting to run into some mental health issues, but Americans spend a lot of time online. If you're not spending a lot of time on social media, that means others are spending more than 2.5 hours a day. So it is important. It is more important than TV, traditional TV at the moment, and it is only trending upwards. So it is important. It is here to stay, and it is only growing. Now, for a while in the aquaculture and seafood spaces, I at least noticed that a lot of companies didn't really want to be in the spotlight. They didn't want their operations well known. They wanted to sit in the back seats and just bolster what they do on their own. Now, that's not working so well today because there really is no information that is hidden from the public anymore. The smallest of videos from just anybody can go hugely viral, end up on all the news platforms. And we're seeing this every day now. The public's confidence in aquaculture is waning, not just in the US, but globally. And it's having real world impacts, as we've been seeing in British Columbia, for instance. It's starting to take root in Norway and Scotland and Chile. It's really starting to have a global impact. And you can see it through traditional news outlets too, everything from calling out social media influencers who are attacking aquaculture specifically. It is a relatively easy target because social media thrives on sensationalization. So it's really easy to say that fish are full of parasites when they're in a big pen. It's not easy to describe how, yes, there are parasites in those pens, but they're manageable and they're monitored, and getting into the nitty gritty, it's much more difficult. So the negative really takes root. And that's what I do online. I was watching all of this happen while I was in college. And as a biologist, I knew that a lot of this is sensationalized or just strictly misinformation. And it's having a real world impact. And I didn't like to see that in the industry that I worked in. I'm here because I'm a biologist, because I like marine life and protecting our oceans. And to see that people were actively fighting one of the most pragmatic approaches to protecting our oceans really rubbed me the wrong way. So that's why I got online, and that's why I got into what I do today. And I just want to show you an example of what it is I do today. So as an influencer, I do mostly video content, not entirely video content. I also do written articles, podcasts, etc. But by and large, I post to my own personal channels under my own name across TikTok, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I'll play a video for you here, just so if you haven't seen my channels or it's been a while, you can see what it is I'm doing today. This is from a visit to blue ocean mariculture in Hawaii that I had back in June. So I'll put this up now. Farming fish is a practice that dates back thousands of years, and Hawaii was one of the first regions to adopt it with coastal fish ponds. Today, technology and marine sciences have catapulted some aquaculture operations into the international spotlight. In June, I was lucky enough to visit the Big Island to learn about one of these companies, Blue Ocean Mariculture, the only offshore fish farm in the US. They're raising kampachi. It's a delicious tropical fish, and the way they're doing it makes them one of the most unique farms in the world. It all starts with these wild-caught kampachi. Genetically tested to prevent inbreeding, these wild broodstock will be kept on land to produce millions of eggs every year. Eggs are collected and head to the nursery, where they hatch into these tiny larvae in just a few days. Fed with rotifers and other small marine organisms, larvae spend their first weeks chasing live feed indoors. Kampachi are not the brightest fish in the world, and if they can't see their food swimming right in front of them, they will starve, which is why the water is clayed for contrast. Eventually, juveniles are weaned onto a pellet feed and transferred to outdoor tanks to school. Blue Ocean has honed their feed for decades to keep their kampachi as healthy as possible. It's really a never-ending process of incremental improvements. Once the fish reach about 50 grams, these juveniles are ready for the open ocean, which means it's my favorite time. It's time to get out the fish tubes. Counted and examined, these kampachi head out to sea on one of Blue Ocean's barges. You can see here they're pumped with oxygen and seawater in transit to keep the stress down.
The open ocean out here is where their Kampachi pens are moored, but these aren't like typical fish pens. They're shaped like a three-dimensional diamond, and they can be submerged. And with a volume of 8,000 cubic meters per pen, they can hold a lot of fish. Smaller fish, like those we're transferring out now, have a secondary net within the pen to keep them in. It's removed once they grow large enough not to escape through the outer net. Now, Blue Ocean is constantly monitoring the waters and ecosystems around their pens. They work directly with NOAA to provide insights on the water's health, and a lot of tech goes into this, including this awesome ROV. Take a look at the ROV's camera to see what's going on during feeding. Lots of sea life flourishes around these pens, and water quality is not impacted. Even the sandy seafloor below the pens is untouched. All these sharks around too, they're a good sign because sharks need really clean water to live happily. Now, Kampachi grow out at sea for about a year until they reach about 5 pounds. The whole while, barges and divers are out here daily, feeding fish, caring for the pens, and more. After a year, we're ready to harvest, and this involves a specialized pump, and it utilizes the pen's unique ability to float and sink. Rounds of fish are caught within an inner net and trapped by raising the pen. They are pumped to this barge where a machine sizes them and sends smaller fish back to the pen. Big fish will head down this chute to be iced on board. Right now, Blue Ocean is harvesting about twice a week. These Kampachi will hit the markets next day. They don't need to be bled, but they are processed back on land before shipping. While on the island, I got to try tons of local Kampachi dishes. And let me say, it is one of the freshest, most delicious fish I've ever had. The sashimi was probably my favorite. Blue Ocean's entire operations are just outstanding, and they're so unique. From the hatchery to their offshore pens, they're leading the industry in a lot of ways. They're the only ones like it in the US. Now, there's so much more to this story, from the juveniles in the nursery to the care in the open ocean. Much of what Blue Ocean's doing, they have to invent themselves. This video serves as just an introduction to farmed Hawaiian Kampachi, and I'll be diving into specifics with videos to come. So let me know what you're most interested in here at Blue Ocean Mariculture. Mahalo.
Screen here. So that's what I do today. I did pronounce that Hawaiian phrase wrong, and I was trying my best to get it right, but alas. Now, this is what I do today online. I work directly with companies like Blue Ocean Mariculture to showcase their operations. I'm not trying to push products or sell fish necessarily. What I want to do is highlight unique, modern, responsible, sustainable operations, right? This is the good in aquaculture because so much of what we see online is the bad. Getting here, being able to work with companies directly, going off to places like Hawaii to do this, it was a long time coming. This was not something I just picked up one day and suddenly I'm on a plane. I had to build my audience first. I had to build this presence and my reputability online. So I actually began over 3 years ago. There we go. So I began over 3 years ago while I was still in university. When COVID hit, our universities went online, and that was especially damaging for people like me in a biology degree where we need to be in the labs. Otherwise, it's just aimless YouTube videos. So I took the year off. I took a gap year while COVID was raging and just did what I loved, which was working in the food industry. I grew up in a farm town, so I really wanted to get back to those roots. It was the middle of winter, so there were no farms open at the moment. So the closest thing was seafood. I just picked up a night shift as a seafood team member, cutting fish, filleting fish at Whole Foods. And I really enjoyed this. It was a great introduction to seafood. I got to learn the basics, everything from cutting fish to the different kinds of salmon. These were not things I knew as a consumer, a young consumer going in. I can actually show you this. The first video I ever made. It's something, I'll tell you that.
I get a lot of questions at Whole Foods asking why we tap on our oysters, and it's because we sell them live. If they make a rich, full sound, it's because the oysters are live and healthy. However, if they make more of a dull, empty sound, it's because the oyster is either unhealthy or dead, like this one is right here. We only sell live ones to make sure that you get the best quality product.
That was the first video I ever posted on aquaculture or on seafood. This was back in April of 2021. Not for any particular reason other than I was really enjoying what I was doing at work and wanted to share it with more people. And this video did surprisingly well. I got about 250,000 views on this first video I ever put out there. And that really emboldened me to continue with what I was doing. I woke up one morning and I had all these notifications and I had an impact, and that was new to me. So I just kept doing what I was doing at Whole Foods, posting these videos, recording at work when I shouldn't have been. A lot of times here, like in the emerging industries like what I'm doing in influencer spaces, it's kind of the Wild West. So you really just have to go with your gut a lot of times. And that's what I had to do here because I was gaining a lot of traction online, posting these videos. Some of that traction was from corporate Whole Foods. They were not pleased with what I was doing because I was in the Whole Foods hat, all the gear, with no supervision from them. And I ended up quitting because they wouldn't let me continue doing what I was doing. And I joined up with another smaller distributor, a local distributor here in Boston. And that was the best decision I ever made because the owner let me continue to learn in the industry, work out on the plant, get my hands dirty, but she was totally willing to let me do what I do online. And that was what really catapulted me from, at the time I had around 40, 50,000 followers on TikTok to up in the 300, 350,000 followers on the platform because she let me expand what I was doing there, right? I went from just tapping oysters, filleting fish to here's a massive bluefin tuna we just hauled in. Here's pumpkin swordfish, right? Once in a year, we're going to see one of these. Really interesting points like this. So I really got my hands dirty with that. And then when I came out of college was when I looked at what I was doing and thought, okay, well, this has been a fun hobby around my coursework and everything, but how am I going to do this right? How could I possibly make money at what I'm doing? And that's when Mowi got involved. So for those of you who don't know, Mowi is a large salmon producer. They're vertically integrated around the world. And I started working with them on the side, visiting some of their farms to showcase those salmon farms. They, especially in Canada, where they have been facing a lot of public and government backlash for their farms. It's really important for them to put out a proactive image online, and they weren't able to gain traction on their own. But I had a following, right? I had a group of people, a lot of them in Canada, actually. So they turned to me for help. So they brought me out, they showed me the ropes, let me record along the way. And I produced content like more along the lines of what you saw with my Blue Ocean videos, diving into the specifics of aquaculture. I get a lot of questions like that. So all of this came together on TikTok, but since then, a year ago, I expanded beyond TikTok onto Instagram and LinkedIn. These platforms are really important for the industry. TikTok is so new that it is less important to the aquaculture space. A lot of the viewers are younger, under 24, but Instagram and LinkedIn are older viewers. They're more along the lines with those who are both voting in those districts where you might get farms banned or opened, depending on how social media is performing in any given day, to your direct buyers themselves. So those platforms are really important. And LinkedIn is a social media platform. While there's a lot of use for it for networking and job postings, in its core, it's a really strong tool to promote social media. So I post most of what I do currently, I bring over to LinkedIn as well. And I recommend that companies do the same. Now, I do all of this under the company I formed coming out of college, which was Sibley Media. This just allowed me to work with companies more seamlessly instead of them reaching out and me saying, hey, yeah, I have all these channels, I run them myself. What are you looking for? I was able to reach out to companies on my end and say, hey, this is what I have to offer. This was something that's pretty standard in the industry, in the influencer space, but it wasn't something that I knew coming in. I didn't study aquaculture, social media. That's not a thing. I studied genetic biology. So the online space was new to me. So when I started learning and professionalizing through Sibley Media, I found that media kits are an essential tool for anybody who's looking to do independent influencer work. This is really a document that presents yourself and essentially your company. This is the face of Sibley Media. I do ask that nobody share this screen outside of this Zoom call. There is some sensitive information on here. However, I think it's a really important tool that anybody getting into the space that I do should build. If you are developing an online audience, you're posting some videos, even if you're doing it for a company, right? You're a social media coordinator or manager at a company. It's really important that you have a media kit, essentially a portfolio. This is who I am. This is why I do what I do, my rates and services. And then I've often found that the aquaculture industry is much more distant from social media than a lot of other industries are. So I include an FAQ because a lot of times, most of the time, companies that I'm working with to showcase their operations have never had an influencer out ever. So they have no idea what to expect. They have no idea what to look for. So I kind of have to guide companies through the expectations, not to get too high, not to get too low, what we should do. Let's not micromanage things that don't matter. And those are some of the points I want to share with you going forward in this presentation is, okay, here's what I do online. Here's how I've grown it throughout the past 3 years, but how have I done that? And what does it take to build an audience like I have at just over 400,000 followers? So the most important thing is communication, right? And this is something I see aquaculture companies who are actually trying to build their online presences do so wrong, unfortunately, and it really pains me to see. Now, so I broke down kind of exactly what I have identified as like the most important do's and don'ts when you're making aquaculture content. And these are guidelines that I follow. I've built them myself. I've experimented around testing out things. I've tried to dumb things down too far. I've tried to bash others. It does not go well. It really doesn't. It might in the short term, but it does not overall. So just to walk you through some of like the 5 points I've laid out here, don't be too heavy on the jargon. I would say something like, and you just saw in my Hawaiian video, I use this terminology, right? Broodstock will spawn all of the farm's fish. I wouldn't dumb it down further than that in efforts to broaden your audience so far that you lose those who might actually walk away with true insights, right? You're not trying to reach everybody. That's never the goal online. You're trying to reach those who matter. It's much more important to get 10,000 views from people who are buying in the industry or are voting in those districts where you might be losing a farm than it is to get 1 million views. Yeah, Jackson, I'll take questions as we go.
I guess my question and statement is, do you go into these thinking about who your audience is? Like, for example, I have different types of content, right? I have extension content, I have outreach content, I have edutainment content, and I already know who my audience is when I'm making that. Do you have a goal in mind when you're creating your videos, or are you, I mean, obviously you're doing something, your goal when you're working with when you're doing your own thing versus when you're working for a company, but like, do you have, what is your strategy around that?
Yeah, good question. So often when I work with a company, it's not just to produce one video, even though my social media videos are longer than typical like Instagram Reels or TikToks you might scroll through. They're still only a couple minutes long at best. So I like to do a series, right? 3, 4, 5, 6 videos. The first couple of videos that are more introductory, that's where I am more broad on the subject. I try and rope in as much of my audience as might be interested in this specific topic. And then as you saw at the end of that video, I mentioned, look, this is an introduction. If you have questions, comments, leave them below. Stay tuned for more. So as I continue through that series is when I start to get more and more specific. Later videos in that series, which are now uploaded to my channel, dive into the hatchery and the nursery and the specifics of the offshore operation, all these things like their own internal zooplankton farm. Those are not topics that the vast majority of people, even the vast majority of my audience, are going to necessarily enjoy or watch through, but those people who were roped in from the beginning are. And that's really my goal. I want to start broad and narrow as I go. When it's a series. Now, when it's specific videos, I'm less concerned about whether or not I'm like the actual audience within my audience I'm tackling, because you don't have too much control over that. I'll get into the hook and momentarily, but the first 5 seconds of your video really determine who is going to be seeing your video and how many of them are. That's really my advice on that. Hope that answers the question a bit. And I'll get into more of that topic here in a minute. Now, another issue I see.
I asked that question because, you have different types of people probably here, right? For me, being an extension specialist, my goal sometimes is different than sometimes your goals. And so that's kind of what I was kind of wanting to think about in terms of like who you're talking to here potentially, but we have different goals, and so I was curious like how you decide what that goal of that video is.
So these are not, I would not follow these guidelines for YouTube. YouTube's much more specific. You have subscribers who will be watching most of your videos, and their algorithms do not push videos as far as social media algorithms on short form vertical platforms do. If that makes any sense. So from dumbing things down to not overdoing it, there's a balance to be had. And I've found success with, okay, not just leaving it off as a high school education in biology, maybe a little bit of college as well. That's where I try to hone my niche, at least my specific audience. And I think that's a really good place for most companies in the aquaculture space to be. A lot of people don't know what aquaculture is. Most people can't define it. They don't know that it exists. So there's a lot of work to be done on that side. However, I tend to find people who understand that fish farms are a thing, or oysters are farmed, that exists. Going after that niche is really, I think, the most important for us, because those people are the loudest, whether they be anglers who are strict oppositionists, or those involved in the industry, or they live near the farms themselves and have questions. Those are the people I think we should be attacking. And to do that, I really think that not doing exactly what we're doing here is important. Lecturing does not go well online. People are one scroll away from the most interesting thing they've ever seen. And that's evidenced by low engagement rates. If you've been posting to social media, specifically the short form platforms, and your engagement is below 1%, then you might be having issues with, you're not hitting the right audiences, you're making videos that don't align with those who follow you already, or it's not engaging. Typically what I see most often from farms is they put together a big set of posts, but there really isn't a clear concept behind it. There's no enthusiasm behind it. There isn't a personality. Most people don't follow companies because they love the company. They follow companies because they think the product is interesting, or they're associated with the company in some way, whether it be they work for competitors or the company themselves, or they live in an area where that company operates. So they want to talk to people. And that's really where influencers come in, right? As I mentioned to you, Jackson, the hook is one of the most important things. That's like the first 5 seconds of your video. That's how social media algorithms determine whether or not your video is any good. It has nothing to do with what's happening in the most of the video. Unfortunately, it has to do with the first 100 people who see the video. Are they watching past 5 seconds? Other factors play into that as well. Are they sharing the video? Are they commenting? That's how we end up with this divisive world of these anti-aquaculture oppositionists get a lot of attention because they're screaming chaotic things, and that blows up in the comment section because it's controversial, and the algorithms love that because that's keeping people hooked. Now, I think that's a really important thing to focus on, is the hook, and then maintaining the video quality so that people are actually entertained throughout it and they walk away knowing something, and even honing down exactly what it is between platforms, right? My Instagram is more specialized to the industry than, say, TikTok is. So knowing your audiences on different platforms is really important. Things that I don't think are really important for companies to focus on that I see, or influencers focusing on that I don't think are overly impactful, are things like hashtags and SEO. It's minimally impactful. It really is. What's really important is those first 100 people watching the first 5 seconds of your video. And then are they sticking around for the rest of the video? If you get 100 people randomly from your following list who watch that video and watch 90% of the way through on average, then the rest of your audience is going to see it. The algorithm is going to realize that this is an engaging video. It doesn't care what kinds of hashtags you use. Those are only for people searching different things specifically. You can rarely boost engagement by optimizing specific post SEO, search engine optimization. And then things like trends, be wary of, especially in the educational space. You can kind of ruin the professional stance that a company might have if you're jumping on too many trends. I see it sometimes in the industry where influencers are going massively viral and getting a lot of attention with these trends. That's them as an individual. It's not what they're showing. It's not the trend itself. It's good for a person. It's not good for an operation. I think that it can be a bit damaging if you're a growing aquaculture company, you're trying to make a name for yourself, and you're doing like Taylor Swift dance-alongs. I just don't find that engaging. I think it's better to pose a professional side online. That's what I try and do is, well, I try and keep it engaging, and I'm funny sometimes, and I make jokes in my videos here and there, right? Like, not the brightest fish in the world. I watch them swim into the sides of cages. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But overall, I try and keep it professional. One of the biggest things that bothers me on social media, and something that we cannot be doing in this industry, we need to be proactive. We can't be attacking each other. Bashing others is something I see a lot. Our fish is better than theirs for X, Y, and Z, right? Reasons like that. Trying to isolate yourself from the competition, it makes perfect sense from a marketing standpoint. But what happens is you're restricting people's food choices. You're building fear mongering. And that's exactly what people who are against aquaculture want to happen. That's why most of the wild caught or wild capture accounts that I see, whether it be companies or individuals, exactly what they do is they try and build fear against aquaculture, because then you will buy wild caught at a premium. And so we in the industry cannot be within aquaculture. It's a poor practice for us to bash other farms or other operations. So I like to highlight the good instead of beating down the bad. And then something I want to touch on here for a little bit more is, how do you interact with your audience? So now that social media has or is about to overtake traditional television in terms of consumption, identifying the differences between those two media forms is really important. The biggest one is that you are no longer just talking at a wall. That wall talks back. Your audience can interact with you, right? They will respond, anything from commenting to sharing your videos around to reporting your videos, right? You can lose an entire channel because you posted something that was potentially controversial or gory. And that's something that you need to be careful of in this industry, right? I've had a lot of videos get striked by platforms and people who do not like to see fish being filleted. So how do you respond to those people is something that is really nuanced, and I've had to figure out over the years, because it's chaos online. The anonymity makes people, it emboldens people to say whatever they want, whether it be inflammatory or just plain wrong. So things that I like to respond to are genuine questions, genuine concerns, right? I get a lot of, aren't salmon dyed? Like, isn't that bad? So obviously I'd like to respond to that and explain the difference between a dye and a feed additive. Things that I don't want to touch on are people commenting that are just inflammatory. They're not questions. They're clearly staunch oppositionists. And I'll actually pull up some examples of that here in a minute. I want to show you how I do those 5 steps, the 5 do's, 5 don'ts, with some of these, some other videos that I've produced that I'm most proud of. The first one here is Canadian salmon farming. I did a comprehensive review. I spent, over the course of a year, I visited East and West Coasts, Mowi farms, and got to understand the entire side, the whole spectrum of Maui, Canada, and what goes into their salmon farms. So I'll play that for you here. And then the second is oysters. So I went up to Maine on the Damariscotta, got to see the full-fledged oyster operation with Muscongas Bay. Really interesting if you're in the area up there to see that. And I want you to kind of take, or at least pay attention here to how I'm trying to communicate those points of not dumbing it down, but also omitting some jargon, maintaining the entertaining side so it's not a lecture. The really important points there, and just really describing what makes them unique, but not attacking others as much as I can. This first video is a bit different than that because the whole point of this is I'm attacking the opposition. So you'll see what I'm talking about in a second, but I end off by talking about how this is good, not these are bad.
This is previously frozen, farm-raised Atlantic Canadian salmon. It was like $10 a pound at my local grocery store here in Boston, and no other information was provided on the farms, the fish itself, where in Canada. And that's stupid because there's so much more to this story, and without this information, misinformation leads.
Farm-raised salmon being one of the most toxic things that you can consume.
Farm-raised salmon is initially a grayish-white color, and then artificial coloring is added back in.
Farm-raised salmon is loaded with parasites, and in order to deal with this problem, they are doused regularly with pesticides and antibiotics.
which is why in the last 12 months, I've been to hatcheries and farms on the east and west coast of Canada. So let's dispel some of this ridiculous fear-mongering and jump into what farm-raised salmon is in Canada. Out on the west coast of British Columbia are some of the country's biggest hatcheries. All farmed salmon begin in these land-based freshwater hatcheries where millions of eggs are cared for at once. Atlantic salmon are domesticated. They've been selectively bred to give us the healthiest and most resilient fish possible. They are not genetically modified, but they're genetically monitored to give farmers as much information as possible. Juveniles are grown out in tanks with artificial currents and day-night cycles. Water is a precious resource and is therefore recirculated through large filters where beneficial bacteria and mechanical systems clean the water. Fish are brought out to sea only once they've reached a certain size and undergo a physiological change called smoltification. They are complex animals with changing nutritional requirements as they age, which is why feeding them is the most important and most expensive part of the operation. Out in the open waters is where most controversies arise with farm salmon. Let's jump out to the East Coast to look at some net pens nearing harvest. It can take years to bring salmon up to size. This is wicked cool. It's a live-in barge where farmers can monitor their pens 24/7. Lots of tech goes into automating feed and reducing waste. Given modern food science, farmers can use a range of ingredients that are more sustainable than just fish meal. This is not a bad thing. Emulating the wild diet exactly would not be sustainable at all. One such ingredient is astaxanthin. It's an antioxidant found naturally in salmon diets through crustaceans and algae, and it's included in their feeds in farms because it's a natural part of their diet. Astaxanthin also gives salmon its distinct color. A lack of understanding that astaxanthin is just an ingredient and not a dye is where all of these gray meat myths come from. As for antibiotics in medicine, their use has drastically declined in recent years to almost negligible levels when compared with decades past. The use of necessary medicines on farms is what keeps the fish healthy and with a significantly lower parasite count than is found in the wild. You can also see some pens here that are not in use. It's a practice called fallowing, where pens are left empty intentionally on a cycle to reduce the environmental impact of keeping a school of fish in one place. Now, the relationship between salmon farms and their surrounding environment is complex, and it is therefore heavily regulated. Farms are under the watchful eye of environmental regulatory bodies all the time. Broadly speaking, these regulatory bodies find that farms nowadays have a minimal impact on their surrounding ecosystem. Many farms have no negative impact. It shouldn't really surprise anyone that there is a healthy level of fish that can be kept in these fjords with strong water currents. So, farm-raised Canadian salmon. It's a controversial topic because it's had a rough past and the industry does a poor job communicating modern advancements. All in all, today, farm salmon is a healthy, safe, and environmentally friendly protein with a pragmatic potential to scale for growing demand. Where the industry falls short is communicating this to you. There are some vertically integrated farms where they sell directly to you so you know exactly who and where you're buying from. But by and large, by the time you're eating that salmon, that information is lost to the middlemen and the fragile cold chain transportation network. This video is to help you feel more confident at grocery stores and restaurants. No two farms are alike, and many have great stories and missions behind them. Don't feel pressured to limit your food purchases or only go for the expensive stuff by the fear mongers online. The best thing you can do with seafood is vary your choices and seek out the innovative farms doing really cool stuff.
This was a video I put together after, as I said, a year of visiting farms across the East and West. And as some of you who are really involved in this industry might have noticed, not everything I say is 100% true, and that's intentional, right? This is a year of visits covering a massive industry across one of the countries, or one of the world's largest countries. It is really difficult to condense that down into 4 minutes. And 4 minutes is already a very long time for a social media short form video. So I have to pick and choose what it is I need to focus on and what it is I need to simplify to the point where it can be misleading. And that's the problem is I don't have the resources to go make a whole Netflix show about it because that's what it would take to cover every little piece. So you have to pick and choose what it is you need to focus on, and you have to let the rest go, essentially. And that's what we're trying to do here, right? I try and pick and choose the parts that are important to fight all of the misinformation online. The rest is, I try and address it in the comments as best I can, but we have to do what we can do with the time we're given, which here was 4 minutes, 13 seconds, one of my longest videos. Now I'll move over to oysters because I've talked a lot about fish today and sick of it. A lot more to aquaculture. So I want to show you something on the Damariscotta. It's one of the most fascinating trips I've been on and one of the coolest companies I've ever seen.
Welcome to Maine's waterfront. I spent the day on the Damariscotta River with Muscongas Bay Aquaculture. And let me tell you, this is one of the coolest aquaculture operations I've ever seen. So are you ready to dive in? Let's start all the way at the beginning with the broodstock. These special oysters were chosen to seed hundreds of millions of New England's oysters, both for farms and for restoration projects. Baby oysters, or larvae, start out free swimming. These little guys are about a month old. They're raised in this land-based hatchery by the river that holds over 200 million baby oysters. Oysters are stationary once they stop swimming, and they filter feed, so they need nutrient-rich, flowing waters to grow. And algae is the growing oyster's food of choice. To feed their hundreds of millions of oysters, this hatchery also functions as an indoor algae farm. Different species of algae are grown to support growing oysters' changing nutritional requirements as they age. Algae-rich water like this is pumped throughout the hatchery. That's why this water looks green. Now, once juveniles reach a few millimeters, they're brought out to sea in these rafted nurseries. This semi-submerged box is pumped with seawater to keep the oysters feeding continuously. Check it out. This one box alone holds almost 500,000 baby oysters. After a few weeks of growing in the nursery, oysters are ready for the open waters. This farm specifically uses 2 grow-out techniques: surface culture in floating cages and bottom culture. We'll start with the surface culture. Oysters get sized on a shaker and placed in these cylindrical cages. They're stapled to the shore where tides lift and rotate them continuously. The benefit with caged aquaculture is that it reduces mortalities. Up to 90% of these oysters will make it to harvest. Plus, the farmers can monitor their crops really easily. Now out to bottom aquaculture. Instead of a semi-closed system like cages, oysters can be farmed right on the muddy seabed. The benefit here is that seabed oysters grow thicker, but bottom culture also leaves oysters open to the environment and predation, so mortality is much higher than with cages. This small dredge boat pulls mature oysters off the seafloor. Then they're brought to this floating processing dock to be cleaned and sized. With bottom culture, you'll get oysters of all shapes and sizes, as well as some other native sea life. The crew sizes oysters from petites all the way to these monsters, which, yes, they say are just as delicious as the smaller oysters. Cleaned and culled, these oysters are left to purge for a week. This lets them clear out sand and grit so that they're ready to eat right when they're shucked. Now, you might notice the river is completely full of jellyfish, and I asked about this, and they're saying that the river is having a bloom right now, which the farmers say is a great sign for their oysters since jellies only bloom when the water is warm and full of nutrients. Now, this farm alone harvests almost year-round and provides millions of oysters to the East Coast. It's an unbelievable operation, and I had such an amazing day on the water with the farmers. I can't thank the Maine Aquaculture Association enough for setting up this visit. Now that I've seen Maine's oyster farms end to end, I feel confident in saying that Maine's aquaculture scene is just beginning. The Damariscotta River Basin has been an oyster hub for thousands of years. Native Americans actually built this massive shell mound called the Whaleback Midden over hundreds of years. Prior to excavation, this shoreline oyster midden was thousands of feet across. Today, less than 0.0005% of Maine state waters are being utilized for aquaculture. So the room for growth is evident, and I'm really excited to see what the coming years will bring for the state's evolving waterfront.
So these are 2 videos I chose to outline how I can be both proactive on the right and reactive on the left, while still putting a positive spin on the whole thing, not bashing anyone else in the industry, any companies, and really just promoting confidence in the consumer. The Maine Aquaculture Association up in Maine, obviously, that was a really unique visit because it wasn't with the farms, it wasn't with Muscongas Bay directly. I actually worked with the Maine Aquaculture Association and the Island Institute, who are these bodies in Maine that oversee and aid a lot of the the companies in the area. There's a lot of really small oyster, mussel, and other operations there that are really, mom and pop shops. So it was good to work with them and see not only large players like Muscongas Bay, but some of these much smaller ones to try and bring that to life for people. Now, the whole goal of this and the whole goal of videos that are in partnership with companies is I need to balance what I want to post to my channels and what I want to promote versus what the company's interests are, right? At the end of the day, I'm getting paid. So there's a happy medium. And you might be able to identify it in some of my videos where I'm talking about this is like some of the best fish I've ever had, yada, yada, yada. But I'm also talking about the things that I love about the operation, right? They're working with Noah's fisheries, or this has been an oyster hub for thousands of years and diving into the history of it. So I work with the companies to outline that balance. And that's a really important part. Some of the first videos I did, I let the companies that I was working with take the reins, and I ended up just making an ad, and I hated it. It did not mesh well for myself. It was difficult for me to produce, and then my audience wasn't a huge fan of that either. So for me as an influencer, it's best to make content that's organic when I'm working with a company. And in order to do that, my videos are never sponsored. Only my trips are sponsored. So the stuff that I'm posting is not vetted. It is not going through approval processes. In good faith, I'll communicate with companies to make sure my facts and figures are right. But nothing I'm putting out there is ever, this is exactly what Muscongas Bay wanted me to say word for word. This is their script. No, that's never the case. It's I go, I learn, and then I make. Something I wanted to circle back on just before I wrap up shortly here is communicating beyond the video, right? So you post the video, you spend hours and hours and hours making these videos, and then that's not it. That's only half the battle, because now you have to communicate with your audience, right? Because now that the video is out there, people are engaging with it. How do you communicate with them? Because if you do nothing, not only is that really a bad practice, both as a company, as an influencer, if you're just ignoring people and posting stuff, but it can let the community, your community, run rampant with misinformation. And there's a balance to be had there. So I'm going to show you.
Welcome to Maine's.
Next, there we go. I'm going to show you some examples. These are all real examples that I screenshots from my videos of comments that I get. The genre is not unique. I get these sorts of comments all the time, but I am highlighting some of the more ridiculous ones so that you can see the kind of stuff that you face online when you start trying to become a personality, right? You're going to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, I choose to engage with, as I mentioned prior, people who are genuinely inquisitive or concerned, or they have compliments, right? People who are putting thought into their, like they watch the video clearly and they have an actual question, or they have a comment, or they want to, even concerns when people say like, isn't this like destroying the environment? Those are the sorts of things that I like to respond to or engage with. The other half are the people who are just anywhere between off the rockers and they just hate aquaculture. And you can see some of those examples here. It's kind of, this is the stuff I deal with every day. Now, it's one practice is to just delete everything and moderate as best you can. I don't like to do that because, I mean, as a scientist, I really just like to see how people are reacting and let the community be the community it is. Now, I delete stuff that's clear threats or just really absurdly offensive. I get a lot of that, but by and large, I leave comments as they are because that's somebody's opinion and it's important for it to be out there. But engaging with the comments that are real questions, real people with real concerns, not only does it help them as an individual, right? Now they're more invested, they're more involved. Oh, the creator is responding to me. That's great. Now they're following along for years to come. But it also helps other people see, right? I mean, one of the first examples in something I would engage with or have engaged with, that question got 44 likes and people were reading my response. And that's really important because when people have questions, the first thing they do is go to the comment section, scroll through to see if it's been answered before they write out a paragraph. However, the minority of people that are oppositionists to aquaculture, no matter the circumstance, are very, very loud. And sometimes they're well-funded and organized, and that can take a serious toll. I've often woken up to thousands of comments and direct messages and inboxes that are pretty egregious. People will say and do anything online because they're anonymous or they think they are. I've even had people show up at my house. I got doxxed over a video about Arctic char. Kind of ridiculous, in my opinion, but it's the stuff that happens when you try and do what I do to be a personality online, right? It's the more I grow, the more problems I face with that. And as I've done that, I've learned that I really need to take breaks, right? I'm not online all the time. I schedule in times that I'm not going on my social media accounts or any of that. I'm not posting, I'm not responding, I'm not opening it. I just mute it. because it's really important to do that. I wasn't doing that for a while, and this is important for people who are working as social media managers at companies as well. I've heard the exact same thing from them, is just the constant hate that you see, even though it is a minority of people, can be really damaging. And you burn out, right? I've had multiple times where I wasn't taking breaks ever. And then 5 or 6 months later, I was like, I'm done. I hate this. I can't do this. And so then I wasn't online for a month. And that's not a good practice as a creator. So it's better to build in that schedule to just, get away from the chaos of it all. Remind yourself that on the persona people put out online, what they say online, does not reflect what they think or do in person. And then the final point here, I'm running low on time here, that I wanted to make is you need to embrace the volatility of social media. As I said, like the hook, the first 100 people watching your video, they really determine what's going to happen, and you don't have any control over that. So you can make the best video you've ever done. I went to Saudi Arabia for a week and poured thousands of dollars in resources and all of my PTO into this amazing video, and it did not get seen by a lot of people. And that's fine. That's what it is, because I tried my best, and it's a really good video, and the people who watched it enjoyed it. But the engagement wasn't very high. Now, I always go back and look and analyze, why did this happen? In this circumstance, I think it was probably because my hook wasn't strong enough, right? I was talking about Saudi Arabia immediately, which I guess a lot of people just might have not had interest in. It's too distant for them. So I learned from those mistakes, and you continue onward. Most of my videos, or most of your videos, will be, in a middle range, and it depends on your following. But for me, that's around like 20, 30,000 views. And that's kind of where I shoot to be. And when I work with companies, I always outline that I'm never going to guarantee viewership, right? I'll show you my median. I'll show you the bell curve, but I'm never going to say, okay, yeah, let's go do this and let's get 100,000 views, because you can never guarantee it. So you're never able to do that. So just be very careful of promising viewership. You can promise the content and the quality that you will make and produce, but where that goes once you've posted it is not really up to you. And then, of course, on the other side of the bell curve, you have some videos that do very, very well. So it's really important to look at those ones that do really well and understand why. So for instance, this was a video I did with the Shrimp Box, which is a land-based shrimp farm out in Indianapolis. And I didn't know this at the time because I'm really involved in the industry, but most people have never seen a shrimp alive and swimming. And that was a really engaging part of my video, right? Right at the beginning, I had shrimp swimming around, and immediately people got drawn in because they were like, a lot of people don't know that shrimp are not curled. So, it's we need to remind ourselves that the consumer, really most of their seafood knowledge comes from whatever's at the Whole Foods counter. And it's not much beyond there. So working with that is, I looked at this video and understood, oh, okay, that was a really engaging point. And then most people watched all the way through the end, and now they understand that shrimp farming is not just massive plots of land in, foreign places, but we have a strong shrimping industry here in the US, and it's growing, and there's new ways to look at it. So that was a really strong point I took from that. I know this video, this lecture's gone on a little longer than I'd hoped, but I always end up talking way too much. So I'm going to leave it off here. I'm going to put my socials down below. If you don't follow me or you haven't seen my stuff and you want to check out some of the videos I've made, my TikTok has everything, almost 800 videos. So I'd recommend going there. But my Instagram and LinkedIn are a great source as well, because I picked those up about a year ago, and they have some other content that isn't on TikTok as well. So I'll wrap up here and I'll open it up to questions. I don't have the chat, so Joe, if you don't mind jumping in there.
Yeah, thanks, James. Yeah, that was really awesome. And I think we all have a lot to learn from you, especially those of us who are communicators in the aquaculture industry. And I will get there are a couple questions in the chat that I'll get to, but I just wanted to let everybody know that if you want to present at one of these Connect and Learn sessions like James, I see we have Tyler in the Zoom who did the presentation last week. And then we also have Tim, who's going to be doing one in August. So if you'd like to present, we really value the expertise of our members on the exchange. And you can just email me, which I'll leave in the chat. We can go for like 5 minutes over it, I think, to allow some questions. But if you don't get your question in time, please leave them in the discussion thread. I know I will certainly be posting some questions there for you, James. And then the very last thing is, if you have some time while we're doing questions, if you want to take our exit survey for this session, it just helps us improve them and make them better. But yeah, if we can go to the first question, which I think was from Cora, she was asking about, in terms of your comment about a commercial attempt to make money if you share that your content isn't sponsored. And if you ever go into your process about how you choose the farms that you visit, and if you spotlight in order to address the concerns of people who are afraid of companies that are greenwashing, et cetera.
Yes, so there are specific FTC guidelines around disclosure of ads and sponsored content. You can find those online from the government. It is really lengthy and it is really confusing, and it is not well enforced, which is why there's just chaos online. Now, my interpretation of them has been that if the video is paid for and monitored by a company and you are promoting products and brands, et cetera, an ad, then you need to disclose it's an ad. What I do is the reason I don't, on videos that are in collaboration with companies, half of my videos are not. The reason I don't put that out as a sponsored tag is for a couple of reasons. None of the videos I produce are monitored, nor am I promoting anything. The contracts that I have are explicitly just for a visit and for information gathering and for filming for me. What I do beyond there is at my discretion. Some companies don't like that and I don't work with them, because what that means is I could show up, record a ton of stuff, leave, and do nothing. That would be a bad look on me, but I think it's important for me to have full creative authority on what I do and the messaging behind it. If I like a company and their operations, then yes, I'm going to tell people that I like the company and their operations. If I don't, then I have done visits where, smaller visits, they're not big trips, but where I don't like what they're doing. And I thought it was malicious in intent, or it was outdated and didn't deserve the sort of recognition that they wanted me to give them. So I didn't. So that's the distinction I make when it comes to it. Everyone makes their own distinctions to it. Sometimes if I have in the past done properly sponsored videos with companies where they are writing the scripts, they're looking at everything, they're vetting it, they have vetting authority before I can post anything and all of that. And I found that process to be really inhibitive. It took 6 months to get a video out once, and that's just not how social media works. So where I stand now, I don't work with companies unless they're willing to adhere to these specific guidelines I have, where you look at my portfolio, you see what I do. If you like what I do, you'll let me do it at your facilities.
Cool. And yeah, and Sarah had a question about how companies find your services, whether they're local or international.
Yeah, so it was really difficult at the beginning, right? When I got out of that distribution job in Boston, where I could just make content every day from work, it was really, really difficult because I had to reach out to people and show these companies who had never worked with an influencer before, never even considered the possibility, don't have the marketing budget for it, all of this, and talk them into it. That didn't work typically, especially at the beginning, because I didn't have a presence. What was really helpful there when reaching out to companies was having a strong LinkedIn presence. The first thing a lot of people do in the industry when they get cold calls and emails is they go look that person up, typically on LinkedIn. So I built out my LinkedIn presence. I spent a year making sure that the image I had on LinkedIn was that of credible. I was a credible source in the industry. I was up and coming, and that I had a lot of examples on there of what I do. That's what let me get some of those first companies to let me come see their operations. Nowadays, because I was doing that over and over and over, right? I very long nights for a long, long time in college on that and beyond. Nowadays, mainly because my LinkedIn presence is so strong, I don't have to reach out to companies. I have enough inquiries coming in from the industry typically it's from their marketing or PR teams, people who are scouring the internet anyways for things that have to do with the industry, or it pops up in their feed because most of their algorithms are honed towards seafood. So it happens organically now like that. But at the beginning, it's very difficult, and I recommend you use LinkedIn.
Cool. And then I think our last question for now, at least, is you mentioned one extreme of how long it takes to edit a video, but like on average, how much time goes into editing videos?
Yeah. So right now, with I just posted my 4th video with Hawaii, or from Hawaii, and those videos are averaging about 7 or 8 hours each. And those videos are typically 2 to 3 minutes in length. I use CapCut as well, the pro version.
Okay. Yeah, we have time for a couple more questions because I see there's some hands raised. Ethan, what was your question?
Hopefully y'all can hear me. Thanks for presenting, James. It was really good. And I've kind of always had my interest in some of the social media stuff, but quite frankly, social media, even for me being kind of young, is overwhelming. So I'm wondering, are there kind of apps or other things you use aside from the apps you post to that help you make your videos or time posting? I know there's a lot of options, quite frankly. I'm just wondering if there's ones you've found useful.
I highly recommend against editing in a social media app, because then you have a really difficult time bringing that video to other platforms. CapCut is just what I've experienced with. I've used it since my college projects, and it's just intuitive to me. You can use a ton of different editing apps for that. Beyond the actual platforms themselves and my editing regiment, I film mostly on my phone. Sometimes I rent drones, sometimes I don't, but it's all on my phone. And then I bring it over to my iPad and my laptop to do the editing, and I bring it back to my phone to do all the posting. It is totally overwhelming. I know. If you haven't edited before for social media, just mess around with CapCut a little bit. I'm sure if you're like me, you were doing all sorts of weird stuff on iMovie when you were 12, like editing stuff, GarageBand. It's pretty similar to that. And the pro version is only $8 a month.
Awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Ethan. And then Zach, last question. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, quick question. Hopefully y'all can hear me. I'm noticing that you don't have a YouTube on here. I was curious your thoughts on like maybe getting into YouTube for longer format stuff, if you've thought about that, and why the reasons you might not have, or just your thoughts on YouTube as another platform.
A great question. YouTube is a fantastic platform for creators, and anybody who can do it should. It's really especially important for creators. Companies are less involved on YouTube directly. However, as a creator, it's the most lucrative platform to be on. I'm not on it intentionally. It's a horizontal video platform. YouTube Shorts is far too inhibitive. So you can't post a video longer than 60 seconds. That rules out 95% of all videos I make. So it's not worth it for me there. As a horizontal platform with longer form content, I really can't be recording on my phone and editing on my iPad. To maintain the video quality that I post on TikTok and Instagram and LinkedIn, I would need a real proper camera, probably a couple editors on a team, because my editing time would shoot up into the 20s and 30s of hours. And it's just, I don't have the resources to do that. Making that jump to YouTube to maintain the quality of video that I do is not something I can feasibly do at the moment. I want to someday, but it's too much at the moment. If you can do it though, at a lower quality video, like if I was back at Whole Foods or Foley Fish when I was doing those really lower quality videos, and if I had just recorded horizontally and done it on YouTube instead, that'd be great. But I didn't, so I'm here. Not that here is a bad place, it's just different. YouTube and the other social media platforms, they're really separated by the vertical versus horizontal. You can record both at once, only with a really strong camera, not something on your iPhone.
Yeah, agreed. All right. Thanks y'all for all the questions. Thanks again, James, for presenting. This is really great. We will be uploading the recording later this week. But yeah, that's it for now. Y'all have a good rest of your week.
thank you everyone for joining in. I hope you like this call. And if you want to reach out, all of my socials are a great way to do it. I check them every day, except for my off days.
All right. Thanks, James. Have a good one, everyone.